You have a passion for changing attitudes in the business community regarding employment for individuals with disabilities. Why is this important for you?
Well, it's important on a number of levels. First of all, I believe that people who have a disability, regardless of the level of disability, that everybody should work. And so we have a very large unemployment rate for people with disabilities today in Canada. So StatsCan says that that number is 50%. But we know that that number is actually much higher because there's an awful lot of people who have disabilities who dropped off the grid out of sheer frustration. And so we know that the unemployment rate for people with disabilities is around 70%. Now when you compare that to the Great Depression, back in the 1930s, the unemployment rate for people in Canada at that time was 24%. That was the highest it got to. And so it was a national tragedy. And today, we're acceptance of an unemployment rate of 70% for people with disabilities. You know, we need to get people with disabilities into the workforce because that is really the most important aspect of their life that's going to encourage them to live a full life by being contributors to society, by being taxpayers. You know, disability employment is really not a social problem. It's an economic problem. The unemployment rate is an economic problem. For every 100 to 125 people with disabilities we take off of benefits and get into the workforce is a saving to the economy of about $1 million. But people with disabilities want to work. They want to contribute to society. They want to live a full life. They have the same wishes, same goals as the rest of the population. So why shouldn't they work?
Can you tell me a little bit about your own experiences as an employer? You own 7 franchises of Tim Hortons, so can you speak to some of your own experiences of hiring individuals with intellectual disabilities?
Well, my wife and I opened our first Tim Hortons in Scarborough, Ontario in 1995. So we've been in business for about 20 years. We now have 7 stores. But at the very beginning, my first store was a very large store, 65 seats, very large dining room. And I knew at the very beginning I was going to need some help. I couldn't keep up with the dishes, I couldn't keep up with the dining room, couldn't keep up with the dishwasher, neither could my staff. So I advertised for a dining room attendant. And a gentleman by the name of Clint walked through the door looking for work. He was ready to work, and Clint has Down syndrome. At that time, I hadn't been around people with intellectual disabilities very much. So I enlisted the help of Community Living Toronto, a very large community-based organization that had great, excellent job coaches who came out and helped me to train Clint. Because as you can imagine, the training was going to take a little bit longer. We had to teach Clint how to take a bus, for example. I didn't have that time. I'm already working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, trying to get my business off the ground. And this is a service that's provided free of charge. Free of charge to me as a business owner in Ontario, and free of charge to businesses right across Canada. Now these job coaches helped me to train Clint, and in 2 weeks, Clint came on board, and very quickly, I realized that Clint was my best employee. Early to work, didn't want to go home, worked through his breaks, worked diligently all day, and when he wasn't working, and he was at home with his family or with his friends, he talked non-stop about the fact that he had a job at Tim Hortons. It was that valuable to him. As my business grew, I added more people who have intellectual disabilities, Down syndrome, and other types of intellectual disability. And I started to see a change in my turnover rate. I started to see a change in my absenteeism rate. Those numbers were starting to go down. Now for those who are not in business, those are very expensive demographics. If you look at the cost of turnover alone, for me to replace one entry-level person in a Tim Hortons can cost me about $4,000 when you consider the cost of advertising for a new person, training, uniforms, the lower productivity of a new person versus somebody who's been with you for a long time. It can be very expensive. So if I have a lower turnover rate than my colleague down the street, then obviously as a business owner I would make more money simply because I'm an inclusive employer. And as we started to see those numbers change, we expanded into other types of disabilities. So in the last 20 years I've hired 93 people with a disability in every department including management. And currently today I have 41 employees with a disability out of 250 employees. My turnover rate today is 40%. The average turnover rate in the quick service restaurant industry in Ontario is 94%. So simply by being an inclusive employer, I make more money. And of course, that's the message we need to get across to other business owners so that people with disabilities won't be looking at that 70% unemployment rate. So we also noticed other business benefits to being an inclusive employer, and that includes people with, who have intellectual disabilities. We noticed that our safety rating had improved. People who have a disability quite often tend to work in a more safe manner. They're less likely to have risky behavior, less likely to take chances. And safety is a very expensive component of operating a business. So if a safety rating is higher, simply because I'm an inclusive employer, well, that's a great thing. But we also have higher productivity. People with disabilities have at least the same productivity as a person who doesn't have a disability. But in many cases, the productivity is higher. And part of that is because the job is so precious to them. They have taken a long time to get that job. They know that the grass is not necessarily going to be greener on the other side of the fence. They know that they have to work hard to keep their job. Perhaps that's unfair compared to the population who don't have disability, but it is a reality. And so we do see increases in productivity 10, 15, 20%. The best part of that for a business owner is that can become infectious with the rest of the employees. And so you find that the overall productivity rate of your employees is increased. We also find too that, not necessarily for intellectual disability, but for other types of disabilities, that we have a higher innovation factor. People who are in a wheelchair, for example, may have different problem-solving skills because they get up in the morning, have a shower, make breakfast, get in their car, go to work. They're already thinking outside the box. They're already different problem solvers.
How have your customers responded to your inclusive hiring process?
Well, 11 of our 41 employees who have a disability have a disability that will be obvious to a customer, such as Down syndrome. And those employees are frontline workers, so they're in the dining room. So those are the ones that the customers would see first. Most of the other employees with disabilities are unseen. The customer service, their managers, the drivers, the drive-through workers, their logistics, and of course, not an obvious disability. But customers always have positive feedback. In 20 years in business, I've never had a customer come to me and complain about the fact that I'm an inclusive employer. I do, however, receive phone calls and emails on a regular basis asking me where my stores are located, because customers want to come to my stores and spend money in my business because I'm an inclusive employer. And that might mean driving past 2 or 3 other Tim Horton locations to get to my stores.
What are the biggest misconceptions in the business community when it comes to the idea of hiring individuals with Down syndrome or other intellectual disabilities?
Well, the number one is fear. The number one is the fear that, what do we do if it doesn't work out? Employers are afraid that if they fire somebody who has a disability, that somehow that's going to become a human rights case. That's simply untrue. I have 41 people with a disability today working in my stores. I have hired 93. That means 50 of them are no longer working there. Some of them I did fire. And there's nothing wrong with firing somebody with a disability. You simply follow exactly the same steps that you would take to remove somebody from the business who does not have a disability. The benefit, though, in having somebody with a disability who you might have to terminate is that you can use the help of the agency to come back in and say, listen, it's not working out, and the agency can help find that person a job somewhere else. But the greatest fear, the greatest barrier to inclusive employment is that fear. But employers continuously buy into a series of myths and misperceptions that a person with a disability is going to work less safe, be less productive, be less innovative, work slower, take more time off, need more doctor's appointments, and so on. And that's simply not true. They also look at the accommodation cost. It's going to cost too much to accommodate somebody with a disability. Well, the reality is 65% of people with a disability do not need any sort of accommodation at all. 35% might need an accommodation which costs less than $500, and that includes extra training. Only 4% of people who have a disability require an ongoing or expensive accommodation.
What would you say to a business that has never hired an individual with intellectual disability or Down syndrome, and what would you encourage them to do?
Well, first of all, I'd like to ask why not. The percentage of people in Canada who have a disability is 16%. 70% of those are unemployed. If you look at Ontario alone, that's 1.9 million Ontarians have a disability. And 70% of those are unemployed. Today in Canada, there is 800,000 job-ready Canadians with disabilities, unemployed, and ready to get into the workforce. That's just the ones who are job-ready. Of those, 340,000 have a post-secondary education, which is the highest in the world. Companies that are not including people with all types of disabilities are losing out. And very soon, we're going to have a labor shortage in this country. We're going to have a significant labor shortage by 2025, perhaps possibly 1 million workers short. And if we don't engage the disability community today, and that includes people with intellectual disabilities and Down syndrome in meaningful and competitively paid jobs, you will be missing out on a great, ready workforce for the future, and you will suffer in business. So one of the things I've learned is that with 93 people hired with a disability in the last 20 years, one of the things that I've always done is I've underestimated the capacity and the capability of a person with a disability in the workplace. I've always done a sort of a litmus test. When the person comes through the door and they start working perhaps with a Down syndrome and they're working in the dining room, I think to myself, okay, that's what they're capable of doing and not much more than that. Well, I'd like to tell you that of the 93 times I've done that, I've been wrong 93 times. The capability and the capacity of a person with a disability in the workplace is far beyond what we really think it is. And what happens sometimes, or oftentimes, is that stakeholder groups, government, service providers, quite often families themselves, parents of people who have an intellectual disability, they want to protect their child. They want to look after the child. They want to do things for their child. And it's not until they get into the workplace and they're on their own, and there's policies and procedures and there's processes that have to be followed, and they learn those very quickly. And they're working with their peers, and they have a manager who's not going to accept behavior that's not acceptable, a manager who's not going to let them get away with things that other employees wouldn't get away with. And so their confidence level is increased so quickly, it's exponentially, and their work ethic grows, and they want to do more. And very quickly we realize that, wow, I was wrong again. The capacity of that person is so much greater than what we really thought it is. And I have one person who has an intellectual disability working with me right now who has had 2 promotions in the last 6 years. And when she first started working with me, I wouldn't have thought that was possible. Parents quite often will, they want to look after their child who has Down syndrome. They want to protect them. And when they're growing up, there's not really the expectation that they're going to go to work. The expectation is that they're going to live as full a life as possible, but they're going to be looked after. Somebody's going to look out for them. And sometimes that can be a little bit of a barrier. What we would like to see is that families talk about employment as an expectation, so that when the child is 10, 11, 12 years old, especially if they have older siblings, is that the expectation is that they're going to work at some time. And the expectations that a child has and dreams and hopes that they have may not be realistic, and that's okay. You know, I was 12 years old, I wanted to be an astronaut, and I knew that wasn't going to work out. But it's hopes and dreams, they have the same. Parents tend to talk to siblings who do not have a disability about what their hopes and dreams are, what they're going to do when they grow up, what they're going to be when they leave school. Mom and dad also go to work, and so the person who has a disability sees that, and we need to have that same expectation for them, and start at a young age, that the expectation is that you are going to work. If the time comes that may not work out, we'll deal with that when that time comes. But we need to keep talking to them about work, because work is how they will continue to have a full and prosperous life later on.